Okay, I guess that means that it's 3 o'clock and we're commencing the meeting, the January 2023 meeting of the Sacramento Zoning Board of Appeals, and I'll ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now we actually had 2 sets of minutes to adopt. We deferred the adoption of the November minutes at the December meeting because not everyone had a chance to review them. So I will ask for a motion to adopt the November 14, 2022 minutes, if everyone has a chance now. Do I hear a motion?
I will make a motion.
I will second the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So the November minutes are adopted. And now we'll turn to the December 9th ZBA minutes, which we received. And if we've all had an opportunity to review it, I did make a few technical corrections and comments on my observations. I don't think any of them were material or changed the minutes in any extent. So if anybody else has any other comments on the minutes, or can we?
I apologize, I did not see them, but you have a quorum to, I missed them for some reason, I just saw them.
Okay. All right, well, I think we can go ahead and adopt them, and you can comment if you find anything that
I'm sure I'm fine.
in your own testimony that was either not accurate, if there's anything of substance.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes. for
Okay, and I'll
December
second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, approved. So again, if there are any technical corrections or anything that you want to bring to Rhodey's attention afterwards, we can fix typos and things of that nature. All right, so our sole item of business today is we closed the hearing on application 2 of 2022 pertaining to 110 Sand Dune Court at our December meeting. We've asked Village Council, Chris Bianco, to prepare a prospective decision on that. Did everyone get a chance to read the proposed decision?
Yes.
Okay. I will venture to summarize the most significant provisions, I think, of the decision, but do not purport to substitute my comments for the actual written decision. So you will recall that it's a building located on Sand Dune Court facing the ocean front. And the applicant wished to, though not required to, raise the house.
Hello? Hey, did you see Edie's email?
Would you please mute yourself?
Well, first, who's speaking? Well, now it's muted, so I don't know. I mean, that was someone not in the room. Okay. The applicant wanted to raise the house to a FEMA recommended level. Again, FEMA doesn't determine the heights. It's actually a village law. But FEMA, it's in a AE or V, what is it, the VE zone? VE17, which means that the base level of the first habitable story needs to be 17 feet above mean sea level. And in the village, we have the 2 feet of additional freeboard. So the house would have to go up to a base of 19 feet. The existing structure is already, I think, maybe even exceeding the existing code, is over 34 feet. And if that house were lifted as is to the 19 feet, the highest point would be something in approximately 51 feet above mean sea level, which would tower over any adjacent structures and substantially exceed even any exceedances that we previously granted to give people an opportunity to exceed the height limitations while raising the house. So the primary variance being sought was for a building height of 51 feet 9 1/4 inches, even though some of that was attributable solely to an elevator, bulkhead, and chimney, which nonetheless, the actual habitable space would have gone up to around 47 feet, which is still somewhat in excess of any variances we have given for height. There was considerable discussion of whether the building was a 3-story or a 2-story structure, and whether raising it would create 4 stories, even though 1 story being uninhabitable down at the waterfront is generally excludable. Because of technicalities, even though there are visually and in common sense 3 habitable floors to the house, legally it is certificated as a 2-story house because the stories are offset adjacent to each other. So there aren't 3 stories above each other, stacked on top of each other. I don't think that the number of stories is particularly material because the primary objection to this structure pertained to its height, its overall height, whether 2 or 3 stories. Raising the house to that height also created a very substantial pyramid exceedance. There was substantial testimony as to how the pyramid was computed, from where, and whether exceedances in the side lots did or didn't constitute increases in non-conforming side lots. Again, I don't think some of that discussion is necessary to our decision. The practice in the village, as I understand it, allows the pyramid base to begin 2 feet above actual terrain. But the applicant, I think, was arguing that the base of the pyramid should be at the elevated FEMA level, which didn't make sense. And giving the applicant the benefit of the doubt of the 2 feet at the base level, there was 17,116 cubic feet of pyramid relief necessitated by the proposed application. So those were the major issues. I think, did I miss anything in of other variances that were requested? I think height, story, pyramid variances were the major changes. There was substantial discussion and opportunities offered to the applicant to consider feasible alternatives to what was an extraordinary height increase, including available footprint in the front yard, even on the side yards, over the garage. A number of alternatives were proposed. Only one was addressed. They addressed the possibility of relocating the master bedroom from the top of the house, which was entirely above the pyramid level and height restrictions, to a vacant space above the garage, which would result in the raising the house, and also putting the bedroom somewhere within the existing structure, or, as I say, in front to the north of the house where there was room that would not encroach on necessary septic systems and still be able to be fit in. The applicant produced a very vague, undetailed, conclusory cost estimate of what it would cost to relocate the bedroom. I think the entire cost of raising the house, they claim, was somewhere around $1.4 million. And again, my recollection is not the text of the decision, it's in the decision. But they claimed that the cost of relocating the bedroom or the master bedroom suite alone would be $2.68 million, which was almost twice as much as the cost of just raising the house. We found that not to be a credible number, and believed that there were feasible alternatives that the applicant just was not willing to consider. Okay, so that's my recollection, summary of what we heard in testimony and what we're basing a decision on. And the text of the decision, just to get through findings of fact and the details. Again, I might mention that the height variance was a 17.5% height. Proposed variance would be a 29.4% height variance. And the floor area variance was 47.4%. So those are very substantial variances from our code as well. So as a result of those findings, the proposed decision would deny the height request, the pyramid request, and the two-story requirements. The proposed decision grants the applicant relief from the floor area requirement of 6,000 square feet, 6,116 square feet. And that, of course, would be subject to appropriate diagrams, building plans, photos, etc. And that's the essence of the decision. If you've all had a chance to read the actual decision, if anyone has any comments on it or further clarification before we entertain a motion to adopt it, your floor is yours.
Just a quick question. What was the existing floor? Since we're granting relief, the floor area requirement, what was the existing? So what's the increase?
Probably have that here. I don't recall off the top of my head. You're asking for the existing floor area.
Because we're granting 6,000.
The principal dwelling is 6,061. The applicant proposes the.
I think that was actually the existing.
Oh, that's the existing 6,061 square feet and roofed accessories of 2,955 square feet. And the code allows 5,318 square feet. So they were about 700 roughly square feet in excess of the principal dwelling square footage, and the roofed accessories, there would be substantially in excess, because that code allows 978 square feet. So a total of 6,116. And what they had proposed would be 9,016, 2,000 square feet over in totality. And a lot of that would be exterior space, it would be accessory space. The dwelling increase they requested was approximately a 14% increase. The accessory space was like 370%. So it's a lot of the exceedance in square footage was attributable to accessory. And again, they're not required to raise the house to FEMA levels. It's voluntary here, and I mention that because that's in contrast to other applications where they're required if it's either a new construction or a substantial reconstruction. I did ask at the hearings whether it was feasible to raise the house less than FEMA levels, which would provide substantial climate environmental protection, even if not necessarily for the 100-year storm, but under almost all circumstances without going up as high. The allegation was that the cost of raising the house put that alteration into a substantial alteration category, which if engaged in would then require FEMA compliance. Now, we didn't independently test that number because the number that puts an alteration into substantial alteration that therefore requires FEMA compliance is a percentage of the value of not the property, but the value of the improvements. And since we don't really know exactly what the value of the improvements are and what the real cost of the elevation is, I don't think it was determined whether they could or could not, in fact, raise the house less than to the 19 feet, thereby protecting the home in most circumstances and still being at least less out of compliance with the code. That was a feasible alternative that was suggested. I don't think the burden is on us to determine that. I think they could have come back with an analysis as to whether it was or wasn't feasible to raise the house to a lesser degree. Okay, anybody else have any questions or comments or observations?
No.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the resolution, the decision as drafted.
I'll make the motion.
I will second the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye. So I believe that's unanimous. So we have a unanimous decision. You can advise the applicant of the decision and see that this gets filed in the appropriate place. Okay, thanks very much. All right, there was no new business for us today. Anything else that anybody has to discuss before we entertain a motion to adjourn?
I think we should take more field trips to the beach.
Okay.
It's cold down there now.
It is,
We'll
but
have to
but-
invite the public to join us. if we
Oh,
go.
that's right. Well, that would be
when
fine.
it's
That would be a
cold,
lot of
right?
fun. That'd be
think
a lot of
so.
fun. But I just think that particularly with winter doing what it's been doing on
Yeah.
the cyclonic section of beach, it's very informative for
Yes.
us to look at it, I think, because I don't think this is the last of our concerns about FEMA and construction.
No, I agree. And I think that that's why we also had some discussion, informally about revisiting the regulations that pertain to the oceanfront properties generally, so that we're not confronted with one-off variance applications for each house that comes up.
I'm not sure I'm for that.
What? No? You think that we should decide each one on its own?
I just
merits?
think, that the code was written really purposefully I mean, I realize that, I just think that we open it up to weaken it, basically.
Well, I'll give you one example where that might not be the case, and that is that people will want to be raising their homes, and maybe we can provide a little bit more flexibility to enable them to raise the homes without such gross exceedances of the existing code, provided certain modifications are made. And if there's a standardized height, at least you won't have one house popping up and just overwhelming adjacent houses if they could all go to the same level.
1 foot above.
Well, some level above. And the other point is that the FEMA regulations don't necessarily take into account increasing sea levels, perhaps.
They don't,
So-
FEMA doesn't.
Well, not FEMA, but so much, but the actual level of sea level rise and the heights. For example, the code allows 40 feet from the mean sea level on the ocean front, whereas throughout the rest of the village, we allow 34 feet above terrain. Well, if your house is at sea level, you're okay, you can go up to 34 feet. If you're 6 feet above sea level at oceanfront, you can go up to 40. But if you're only allowed 40 feet above mean sea level, and you have to raise the house to 20 feet above sea level, then you really only have a building envelope of 20 feet, which goes from 20 feet above sea level to 40 feet above sea level. And it may be difficult to squeeze houses into that building envelope. So your view is,
Really
Yeah,
taking into
okay.
consideration
Yeah.
the real reality of an ocean being right there and a beach being where we're building houses.
I hear you, and I don't
It's
disagree.
just, I just feel that there seems to be like a willful ignorance about the material of the environment that people move into with these properties. And our excessive basements are yet another. We act like what's in the
Yeah.
ground doesn't exist. It absolutely 100% exists. There's a lot of water down there moving, and we're cutting off water with our inland building that's going excessively deep, just like we're cutting off what nature does with its wind when we go excessively high. And I think that our code, modestly encourages people to look at the reality of where they are. And I think that building firms owe it to their clients to address this honestly when people move forward to buy a piece of oceanfront property, one that is no less sandwiched between an existing wetland and has a history of ocean breaching.
Mhm.
These aren't mysterious events that have just started happening since whenever the FEMA was 2001. I'm not exactly sure, but that's just a code. The ocean has done what the ocean has done.
No, I don't disagree. I think it's a valid point of view.
And I think we just open ourselves up by reopening the code, and I think we just open ourselves up to weakening it because we're trying to somehow compensate for willful
Yeah,
ignorance.
well, to your point, the applicant's own expert who testified said that when he advises clients how to comply with FEMA, he always advises them to comply with the local zoning as well. So certainly the local zoning should govern. And again, as was shown in the hearing, the applicant's neighbor directly to the west had a house there and built a new house on the site, totally in compliance with the code as well as compliant with FEMA. So it is all feasible. I was merely suggesting that if there are perhaps some technical modifications, for example, we did grant a couple of exceedances, maybe about 2 feet. I think we went to 42 feet in one case, maybe a little bit more than that. We might be able to make some modest modifications, which are not inconsistent with what we've kind of allowed before, so that it's not.
We've been talking about the FEMA requirements. I think it's good that we leave it the way it is, like Mary Lee says, but also you should look into the village as these people are losing property. So should they be allowed to be able to build a house that is bigger than their required lot, which is now smaller?
You mean because of the erosion?
The erosion has.
That shrinks the lot size.
I mean, when they had the sand replenishment on the ocean, that was the best thing going, And the federal government was going to take all the rock jetties out and replenish all the sand for the last 75 years they've been talking about. And they did it one time. And then all the taxpayers had to pay for that, And therefore, since other people are losing their property, they should not be allowed to build these massive houses that require all this FAR and
So does that require an amendment to the code, which would
Yeah.
redefine
you should look into something like that.
floor
also.
area that's available on a given site based upon the then current?
We talked about this on
Yeah,
the phone
yeah.
months ago.
Okay, well, I don't think that's subject for us as a zoning board of appeals
It's
as
just
much as
another
it is for
opinion
the
of
board.
Where we're going with the
Yeah,
FEMA
no,
thing,
I think that these things are recommendations to the trustees of the village. I respect Marilee's opinion, certainly as a longtime resident and very knowledgeable about the ecosystem. And I'm just wondering whether there is a way to,
I wouldn't say I'm knowledgeable.
well,
I'm deferential.
okay, but
You've observed the
Yeah,
deterioration.
yeah, but
Yeah.
a knowledge of what's really going on.
well, okay, but you are certainly to some extent knowledgeable of the detriments
Yeah,
that we have been
yes,
permitted
I
to
do
that
feel that I
ecosystem.
have
I think
definitely
you have been
witnessed.
most active in
Yeah.
voicing those in our
Yeah.
deliberations.
Yeah. And I wouldn't ever want to miss the opportunity by us changing any of our.
Okay, well, all right, so that's a valid point of view, but as I said, we're talking about amending the code as opposed to rendering a decision in a particular
Yeah.
case. And the reason the subject is there is because we are seeing applications in particular to the ocean front
Yeah.
faced with FEMA regulations, faced with,
Yeah, no, it's a
a
very real
changing
problem for
environment.
homeowners.
so what if there is a valid way of addressing those changes without further harming the environment, I think it may be worth looking into.
Is it some ways, and just like this might not be that, I'll wait till we adjourn.
Okay. All right, so we adopted the resolution, the decision, and there is no further business, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Oh, the question I had was,
So I'm off the record.
You're off the record, thank you very much.
and I don't know, we don't have.
We didn't want to confine the meeting to only rendering a decision,